The Air Force, in my view, in a very rushed process, immediately excluded Florida and named 5 places in Colorado and a place in California. So myself, the governor, our senators, a lot of our local officials started asking a lot of tough questions on how this decision made, what's the process, and are you kidding me? Florida is out of the running for a space command. And now here we are, over a year later, the Air Force has reversed that initial decision. It's exciting. It's fantastic. And it was a huge, huge reversal.
Florida back in the mix. Could Patrick Air Force Base and the Space Coast be home to the U.S. Space Command? Congressman Michael Waltz on the importance of a decision that could affect the local economy in a huge way. That's with a capital H. Central Florida, Beyond the Soundbite starts now. Hi, everybody. I'm Yvette Brussois, morning anchor on Spectrum News 13 and anchor of Political Connections, joined by political reporter Greg Angel.
The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Socrates. Deep. Hello.
Well, I would have gone with space. The final frontier.
Oh, my gosh. Missed opportunity. All right. I have always wanted to start a show this way, and now I get to do it. Ready?
Go.
In a galaxy far, far away. Well, actually, not that far. We're talking about Washington, D.C., and the Pentagon has given a new hope to Florida Space Coast, Patrick Air Force Base, one of 6 finalists for the location of the U.S. Space Command. We all know it as Space Force. One of the members of Congress who fought really hard for this all the way, really. Joining us now, Congressman Michael Waltz. Thanks for your time, sir.
Hey, thank you. So good to be with you guys, and go Space Force.
Go Space Force, right?
Doesn't quite have the same ring as go Army, go Navy, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
I feel like all of us should be part of the 501st Legion. Okay, I'm going to stop with all the puns. 6 finalists announced by the Pentagon for the location of the U.S. Space Command, among them Patrick Air Force Base in beautiful Brevard County. I thought Florida was already out of the mix. What happened? Because when we got the story, we were all running around the newsroom going, what?
No, it's exciting. It's fantastic. And it was a huge, huge reversal on the part of the Air Force and the Pentagon, as you mentioned. A year ago, when we finalized the Space Force legislatively, which, just to remind everyone, is a whole new branch of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and now Space Force. So we split away from the Air Force, much like for our World War II veterans out there, the Air Force split away from the Army after World War II, whole new branch, headquarters in the Pentagon. What we were then talking about is, where does the 4-star command, the operational command, the general that is directing everything that's going up in space, where does that locate? And the Air Force, in my view, in a very rushed, very opaque process, immediately excluded Florida and named 5 places in Colorado and a place in California. So myself, the governor, our senators, a lot of our local officials started asking a lot of tough questions on how this decision made, what's the process, and are you kidding me? Florida is out of the running for a space command. And now here we are, over a year later, the Air Force has reversed that initial decision, opened a national competition, received over 80 applicants, including 8 from Florida. And now we've had a finalist selection down to 6, and the Space Coast is in the running.
I mean, here we are, literally the Space Coast, and it's like, how are we getting overlooked? I want to ask you, Congressman, we know that the Space Force, according to the Air Force, these 6 locations, they'll be evaluated. There's going to be some virtual trips, some in-person trips. The Air Force says, quote, the assessments will be based on factors related to mission, infrastructure, capacity, community support, and cost to the Department of Defense. Former Green Beret yourself, for some of the civilians here, can you put some of that language into layman's terms? What is it the military is actually looking for at the Patrick Air Force Base and so forth? What are some of the attributes we may have that will get the Air Force to lean towards us?
Well, they're prioritizing, and as they should, they're prioritizing the continuing of the mission and not having an interruption of that mission by building new facilities or by having, this command relocate. The interim command right now, the temporary one, is in Colorado. I think that gives them a leg up, frankly. But the Air Force has also assured us that they're looking across the board: community engagement, quality of life, where people want to live and be recruited and retained. And then the big thing that I'm pushing is human capital. All of these entities, whether it's civilian space like NASA, the military, the companies, are all competing for high-end STEM jobs, but then also what I call wrench turner kind of apprenticeship vocational jobs that are bending metal and building rockets. And it's all right here. That triangle between Orlando and the Space Coast and Daytona, where we have Embry-Riddle, and Daytona State in my district is rich with space talent. The other piece that I think really puts Florida in the very tip of the spear is that we have all of those other space entities already here: SpaceX, Blue Origin, NASA, and its big infrastructure, Cape Canaveral, and all the launches that it supports. All of those things have to work together. And if the mission of the Space Force is to defend all of our assets up there, then why not be located where they are all currently are?
Not to mention the beach and the theme parks in terms of
I don't want to be,
like you can go hiking in Colorado. That's great. But the service members of the U.S. Space Force, they're going to want the beach and the kayaking.
You know who we're rooting for? We're rooting for Florida.
Yeah, we've got NASCAR, we've got bike. What more do you need? I mean, I don't even know why we're even doing this part of the competition.
Gary?
Well, even a year ago when they were talking about locations, you looked at some of these locations, and I looked at the list at least, and was like, where are the launch facilities? Where's the, I would have assumed it would have been Patrick Air Force Base, Cape Canaveral, Vandenberg, or even Wallops. It's like these places are where we can launch. Okay,
let me
rockets.
be a Debbie Downer for just a hot second. So having done construction on our property coming up on 2 years ago, this is, of course, a multi-billion-dollar project you were talking about. Sometimes it is less expensive to build something new than to build upon an aging structure or structures. So what do you say to that argument, Congressman Waltz? People go, well, okay, all right, Florida, you got it going on, but we could do this somewhere else, new construction cheaper somewhere else.
Actually, I think that actually would favor us, because they would have to build something new for the 4-star headquarters down in Patrick Air Force Base, given what's already there. Colorado's making the case. They've had a smaller space command there for years, and look, it's just, let's just flip a switch and it's already there. It'll actually be less expensive in Colorado. But I'm with you, not just from a literal standpoint. Sometimes it is cheaper to build something new, but it's more the philosophy and the thinking. The reason we created the Space Force was new thinking, public-private partnerships, working with NASA. I mean, if you think about in the days of old, kind of given the Navy defends our trade and shipping and that merchant life, that rich merchant life that runs the global economy. That's what the Space Force is going to be doing, defending what private companies are doing in space, mining, transportation, or space station, because the Chinese and Russians have figured a critical weakness for the United States, that our entire modern economy, GPS, how you got to work today, agriculture, everything is dependent on what's up there. They've put it at risk, and we need to be able to defend it. We need to be able to locate where we can coordinate with all of those other things.
So, Congressman, bouncing off of what you just said, Andy Beth as well, with each branch of the military, kind of with a specific discipline, the U.S. Space Force, how involved will they be in the launches, or will their purview essentially take over once the satellite or other resources are in orbit in space, and then that is their threshold to take over?
Yeah, so it's both, right? So again, think of the shipping analogy. The Navy launches its own ships. The Space Force is going to launch its own rockets and its own satellites, and with pure military applications. The merchant marine fleet, everything that we trade around the world, civilians launch their own ships, but once they're out in the water, or in this case, once they've launched up in space, and if they are put at risk, at threat, then the Space Force steps in and helps defend them. So we will have actual satellites up there, almost like Navy ships that defend our satellites.
Wow.
We'll have some up there that can take down ours. But eventually, and not too distant of a future, like for example, the Chinese are looking to put a manned station on the moon. They will have Chinese military assets in that manned station. They're going to put up their own space station, a competitor to our space station. So this is the new kind of warfighting domain. And every new war game that we run, the first shots are either fired in cyber or they're fired in space because of those big dependencies that we have now.
I'm thinking of you as a member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, as well as Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, along with people like Bill Posey, down the road from you really, as well as Charlie Crist on the Tampa side of the state, as basically, and of course, I watch football, but I don't know all the terminology, but once the tip-off, the kickoff happens, yeah, and you see that line, the lineman, rushing through. I see all of you and those names that I just mentioned as pushing forward to try and get Florida whenever you're up there, basically part of the Florida delegation in Congress.
Right.
And the top three things that you're always pushing, that they're always pushing space industry, I'm going to assume has been in that your top three in any conversation that you have at any given time up there?
No, well, absolutely. So both Representatives Crist and Posey are on the Space Committee. That oversees all the civilian pieces, the NASA budget, NOAA, which handles a lot, obviously our oceans and atmospherics and what have you. And then I'm on that committee with them, and the Armed Forces Committee, which has oversight of our spy satellites, the Air Force, now the Space Force, and all of those pieces. So we're absolutely all working together. All of those entities have to work together. We expect it of them as members of Congress with oversight of the taxpayer dollars. But I don't want to leave out, too, it really is a state and local effort. We can't discount the governor and how hard he's pushed. He's talked to the president personally about this, as have I. I've talked to the vice president about it, who is the head of the National Space Council. Our local officials in Space Florida really gearing up to make the case in these big application packets. So it really is our elected officials across the board making the case, because local, state, federal, every one of those bits really have a big place. So we're the linemen, but we got the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. I mean, the whole offense has to work.
As we're talking about space here with Congressman Michael Waltz, I'm kind of reminded of a recent conversation a decade or so ago, the end of the space shuttle program. And there was a lot of question and concern about the Space Coast. Is this it? Is this the end? And now to think, watching the rocket launches and the crowds and the excitement and the people.
Constant.
Not a day goes by, I see like little kids with NASA shirts and things like that. And the cool thing too, it's apolitical. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or anything like that. That is kind of the excitement with the launches and with NASA and things like that. Congressman, though, let me ask you this. Jim Bridenstine has said with the new administration, he's not going to stick around. We know that the Democrats in their official platform has said, look, we support going to the moon. We support the Mars missions and things like that. What are your expectations and your hopes with the space program moving forward with the new administration, and in terms of what kind of leadership gets in there and keeping up kind of the momentum that, especially under Vice President Mike Pence in recent years, the momentum he's built? What are your expectations?
Well, I just want to touch on what you just said about the 60s, though. I mean, obviously we spend a lot of time talking about a divided America right now and a polarized Washington and political system. But I'd say the 60s gave it a run for the money. I mean, that was a pretty tough time. President being assassinated, attorney general being assassinated, iconic civil rights leaders, literally cities burning. Yet what did we all unite behind? Americans unite behind big, bold, seemingly impossible things. We spent more as a percentage of GDP getting to the moon than we spend in our entire defense budget right now. Yet when John F. Kennedy made the announcement in 1961 that we were going to the moon, less than 50% of Americans had even been on a plane, right? Think about that. Less than half of America had ever stepped foot on a plane, yet he said within a decade we're going to the moon. So it is a uniting, just incredible endeavor that I think we've seen, again, to what you spoke to, Gary, the nation really came together in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the George Floyd reactions and protests. Americans were glued to their TV to see SpaceX put 2 colonels, Bob and Doug, and I don't give them too hard of a time that they were Marines and in the Air Force. That's all right. Right. So that unifying factor is really important to never forget. Number one. Number two, we have just incredible technological, scientific, and economic spinoffs. A number of studies have shown over the years for every dollar that you put into NASA, the GDP receives $10 in return. Our entire GPS system, our communication system, even things like CAT scans, computer chips. I mean, of course, Velcro and Tang are the most popular, but the spinoffs, I would encourage everyone to really look them up, are also incredible. To your point on new administration, let's just be straight up and honest. When the Obama administration did not replace the space shuttle program, and that last space shuttle landed, thousands of pink slips went out to the whole ecosystem that supported it. And we have since then had to mother may I and beg the Russians to put our astronauts in space.
What was the price tag on that? Can you remind us the price tag?
Yeah, well, you got to love the Russians. They started out in 2011 charging us $9 million a launch. The last one that we just did a year ago, $92 million a launch. So it's been a cash cow for them. They love the fact that America is dependent. We lost the capability until this year to put our own astronauts in space, what I just think is a slap in the face. So I certainly hope the Biden administration continues, but Biden was vice president when all of this occurred. And I'm a little worried. I'm really worried. They have some big price tag domestic items out there. And I'm worried that that's space and exploration and all the goodness that we just talked about will suffer for it.
Some could say this could be a parting gift from President Trump, right? If Florida got it, kind of?
It could. And the other thing, we'll go back to 1961 and President Kennedy giving his speech at
High
Rice
school
University.
Senior year?
Yes, it was actually.
I was not born.
You may sit down,
just
Greg.
for the record, I was not born.
Well, thank you all. But that was a galvanizing event because the Soviets beat us into space. And basically this country said, we are not going to stand for anything being usurped like that ever again. And in the space of 9 years, less than 9 years, he set out the plan and it was achieved, even though he wasn't around to see it. But that was an extremely galvanizing moment for the United States because the Soviet Union had beat us at something. And we were in the middle of the Cold War then, only 15 plus years after World War II had ended. And it was a high stakes gamble.
Yep.
I'll tell you, too, going out there and covering some of the launches, I meet people literally from London, from parts of Canada. They drive from Idaho and Iowa and Michigan.
They fly in
for the launch itself. And so, I mean, that is something, it's quite magnifying.
But I want to get back to one other part that you just talked about. And I think it's an imagery problem that the space industry has, because you've got naysayers out there who say that NASA is just blowing through money left and right, and we're not getting anything. What are we getting out of it? Oh, we're going to space to see how mold spores grow in space. And how do we fight that imagery?
Interesting point, yeah.
Well, that's a case that we'll always have to make. If you go back and look at the fantastic book Moonshot that really walked through what Kennedy had to do politically to sustain that effort and to sustain that funding with Congress and all of those same questions being asked. Are you kidding me? We're going to spend these billions, up there looking for aliens or moon rocks or what have you, when we have very real problems at home. I think we'll always have to make that case. I think the case that we just talked about in terms of being a galvanizing, unifying function, but importantly, making sure, and that's part of my job as an advocate, of all the technological spinoffs, all the economic spinoffs that come from those investments that, again, a number of studies over the years have showed anywhere from 8 to 12 to 1 in terms of return on taxpayer dollars. But look, as a fiscal conservative, I'm with you as well. And believe me, if you watch our committee hearings, we give the space industry a lot of tough questions and frankly, kind of a pretty hard time in terms of how they're investing those dollars and what we're getting. But this is why I love the direction the Trump administration has gone, and I pushed and others. What SpaceX is doing, what Blue Origin and doing and others, that's private sector driven. They have to sustain their own business model. We're moving away from this 4 or 5% trillions of dollars of government money. There will always be a supporting function, but it's much more of a public-private partnership. For example, they're looking at ways the International Space Station can sustain itself in making money. Hollywood with Tom Cruise is going to be filming up there. Tourists are beginning to pay, obviously wealthy tourists, but eventually that'll come down to go up there. So we're moving towards a more sustainable model, and I'll continue to push that direction.
Looking ahead to the future, what's in the blind spot? And what I mean by that, we know many of the high-skilled workers, for example, data to show a good majority of them could be retiring in the next decade. NASA supports these companies, but, then the focus for STEM, especially as these companies like Harris and Boeing and them on the Space Coast try to recruit and retain. What's in the blind spot? Are we doing enough to, for the trade schools and to keep kids engaged in STEM
and get them started early enough?
Right, getting started early enough. Are there any issues in the blind spot that we need to be conversing about?
It's a great question, and it's something I've also been very focused on by most accounts. National Science Foundation being one of them. We will be 1 million jobs short from a STEM perspective in the next decade. We're not producing the workforce of the future that can fill these fields right now. I think you're absolutely right that it's not a college problem, it's an elementary school problem. I've asked and participated in a number of hearings on, we can't fill those jobs with 10% of minorities participating in STEM and only 30% of women participating in STEM. Just the math doesn't add up, aside from the diversity and social dynamic of that. So I have a fantastic STEM elementary school in my district. And every time Boeing or Lockheed or Blue Origin comes to me about something, I'm asking them, what investments are you making back into your future workforce and the nation's future workforce? So, and I've also passed legislation focused on women and minorities in STEM, also focused on the HBCU Bethune-Cookman that I have, to make sure that that's all coming together. It is a blind spot. We've got to continue to work on it. The other piece is not just the high end, the scientists and engineers. It's also the vocational skills and the blue collar skills as well. Those companies down there aren't just assembling things and launching them; they're building them. And these are high-end metallurgy, coding, materials, robotics, CAD, all of those pieces. We have to get away from turning wrenches isn't cool again, right? At the Thanksgiving table, it is. They're high-paying jobs, and we have to all come together to drive towards that gap. I'm glad you brought that up.
Senator Bill Nelson would tell us in interview after interview, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. And we would say, oh my, but the lull, it's such a big lull. It's like, it's going to come back. You have to give it time. It's in the works. Fast forward. Now, every other week, we're announcing another launch, another launch.
One last night.
Let me ask you, this is the only person besides you, Congressman, who's got, children. I've got a child, a 12-year-old. When you talk about a STEM elementary school, in layman's terms, what does that mean? Capturing these minds when they're young.
Yeah, no, it means, you walk into that school and you've got third graders doing CAD design drawings, actually with little, smeltering pens, doing circuit, but even just walking through, how does a circuit board that's in your phone created? They're entering robotics competitions. They're just really focused on those fields that, and you learn, I think, a lot of the, math, reading, basic science through those interactive. I mean, they printed out a 3D printing model of me in Florida, my face, which is a little scary, but these kids are just incredible. But I think they're really being exposed. And I think it's that exposure early on when they can really get excited about it and then relate it to their everyday lives. They're playing with robots at home. They don't even realize it. Well, how did they get built? What goes into it? How do you program it? They're coding in 4th grade. So that's what it feels like and it looks like, and I love it.
So big picture, looking beyond Space Force, the U.S. Space Command, and missions to the International Space Station.
Yeah.
Should the United States have a commitment to going back to the moon and maybe even Mars, or is the time just not right for that?
No, we do have a commitment to go back to the moon by 2024. Making sure the funding matches that is I think what we'll see or not see from the new administration to sustain that effort. Then with a longer term effort to get to Mars by 2033, just when literally the planets line and it's the shortest distance, there's a program called Gateway that will basically be a space station around the moon. Wow. That can either launch into deep space or launch probes back and forth, both for commercial and for and for national security reasons. And again, I want to take it back to what you mentioned in the 60s in the Cold War. That wasn't just a competition of rockets or whose flag got on the moon first. That was a competition of ideologies, of systems of government, of a way of life. And we are back in that competition right now with the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. And I don't think as a nation we fully realize it yet. The Chinese launched more last year than the rest of the world combined. They are quickly catching up. And they don't really have a NASA equivalent that is exploring for the good of humanity and for the good of all of us. Everything the Chinese do in space is backed by their military, has a military application. They are not looking to coordinate with us internationally. And when they do, they steal our tech and our IP. So that competition's absolutely 100% underway. And I'm trying to bang the drum that we need to get back to that kind of competition of ideas and values, and who we are is playing out right now as we speak.
Where did the time go? We got lost in space. Congressman Michael Waltz, U.S. House District 6.
I can nerd out on this all day long.
We could too. Thanks for being here. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks so much.